She thought she was going home to say goodbye to her father. But what if the goodbye was meant for her? Samia Shahid was a British woman who followed her heart and made her own choices. For that, she paid with her life. What should have been a short family visit turned into a sudden death, a rushed burial, and a long list of unanswered questions. Her family said it was a heart attack. But the signs didn't add up. No doctor was called, no hospital visit, no proper explanation, and just like that, she was gone. Was it really a natural death? Or was it something much darker, a murder disguised as tradition? This is not just the story of a woman who died. It's the story of what happens when someone breaks away from family control and refuses to live by rules she didn't choose. From a quiet village in Pakistan to the courtrooms and headlines in the UK, this case raised difficult questions. How far will some families go to protect their image? And how many women suffer in silence for choosing freedom? This is the real story of Samia Shahid, a woman who wanted to live her life on her own terms, and whose fight for that freedom cost her everything. Welcome to the Crime Series. If you're someone who believes in justice, in reform, and in giving a voice to the unheard, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. These aren't just stories, they're reminders of the work still left to do. Your engagement helps us share the truth and push for change. Samia Shahid was born on November 15, 1987, in Bradford, West Yorkshire, England, into a British Pakistani family deeply rooted in traditional values. Her parents, Chaudhry Muhammad Shahid and Imtiaz Shahid, had migrated from the village of Pandori in Pakistan's Chelm district, seeking better opportunities in the UK. Despite settling in Bradford, they maintained strong ties to their cultural heritage, emphasizing community, modesty, and family honor. Samia grew up in the Manningham area of Bradford, a neighborhood with a large South Asian population. Her upbringing was marked by the expectations and pressures typical of many young women in conservative Pakistani households. From an early age, she was taught to observe modesty in her dress and behavior. Her family followed a strict interpretation of cultural and religious norms, and this extended to the way the girls in the house were raised. Samia's parents were respected in their local community. Her father ran a limousine and car rental business, and the family was relatively well off compared to others in the area. Her uncles and cousins also operated local businesses, including a fish and chip shop and a flower store, further cementing their standing in the neighborhood. The Shahid family was close-knit but also closely watched. Image and reputation mattered deeply. Neighbors described them as disciplined, respectable, and proud of their roots. Samia had one brother and two sisters. As the second child, she often found herself in the position of peacemaker between her siblings and their strict father. At school, she was bright and eager to learn. She attended Nabwood School, where she performed well academically and was known for her cheerful personality. Teachers remembered her as someone who was friendly, cooperative, and always willing to help her classmates. She had a talent for writing and expressed herself well in essays and class discussions. Her favorite subjects included English literature and art, and she sometimes dreamed of becoming a teacher or a writer. Outside the classroom, Samia was sociable and had a wide circle of friends, many of whom came from similar cultural backgrounds. Despite the strict rules at home, she found joy in these friendships. They were her safe space, a chance to laugh, share secrets, and feel normal. She loved music, fashion, and makeup, though she had to keep many of her interests hidden from her parents, who considered such hobbies frivolous or inappropriate. By her teenage years, Samia had already begun to feel the weight of her family's expectations. She was not allowed to attend sleepovers or parties. She wasn't permitted to date or speak freely with boys. Her movements were closely monitored, and she often had to lie to her parents just to meet a friend. Despite this, Samia rarely rebelled outright. She found ways to adapt to balance her family's strict rules with her own quiet aspirations. At home, her life was even more confined. The girls in the family had daily chores, were expected to cook, clean, and behave modestly at all times. The idea of izzat, or family honor, was constantly mentioned in conversation. Every decision Samia made, from what she wore to who she spoke to, was weighed against how it would reflect on the family's reputation. Samia was especially close to her father, but this relationship was complex. He was the authority in the house, and while he showed affection, it was conditional. She often tried to win his approval by excelling in school or by helping out more at home. Friends described her as someone who longed for acceptance but rarely felt fully understood. She internalized much of her stress, confiding only in her closest friends. Though she had dreams of going to university and exploring a career, those plans were quietly set aside. Her parents had a different vision for her future, one that involved marriage, motherhood, and staying within the community. The pressure to marry early was intense, and as Samia approached her 20s, talk of finding a suitable match began to dominate family discussions. Friends and relatives often described her as a daddy's girl, always eager to earn his approval, even when it meant sacrificing her own comfort. Her loyalty to her family was clear, but so was the quiet struggle she endured between her own desires and the demands placed on her. Her parents arranged for her to marry her first cousin, Chaudhry Muhammad Shakil, a man based in their ancestral village of Pandori in Pakistan. To her family, it was the ideal match, one that would keep the bloodline intact, reinforce family ties, and uphold cultural expectations. The marriage was also seen as a way to maintain inheritance rights within the family and to ensure that cultural and religious values were passed down without interruption. Samia had no say in the matter. The decision was made on her behalf, and any resistance would have been seen as disrespectful and dishonorable. In many traditional households, a daughter's marriage is not only a personal milestone, but a family affair with social implications. Declining the proposal would have brought shame not only upon her, but on her entire household. Under such pressure, Samia agreed to the arrangement. In 2012, she traveled to Pakistan and married Shakil in a traditional Islamic ceremony that was celebrated by extended family and community members. The wedding was elaborate, filled with rituals, colorful outfits, and days of festivity. To outsiders, it may have looked like a joyful occasion, but for Samia, it marked the beginning of a life that was not her own. She had just bound herself to a man she barely knew, in a place far removed from the life she was used to. She lived with Shakil in Pandori for a few months. During this time, she reportedly experienced extreme control. According to later accounts, Shakil was possessive and demanding. He monitored her movements, dictated how she dressed, and kept her isolated from others. She was expected to conform to the role of an obedient wife without question. Samia, who had grown up in a relatively modern British environment, found the adjustment not only difficult but suffocating. Her hopes for understanding or compromise were met with silence and control. When she returned to the UK, her demeanor had changed. Friends and family noticed that the once cheerful and outgoing Samia had become withdrawn and quiet. She avoided discussions about her time in Pakistan and brushed off questions about her husband. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, and there was a heaviness in the way she carried herself. Privately, she confided in a few close friends that she felt trapped, monitored, and emotionally drained. She expressed her desire to end the marriage, but feared the fallout it would cause within her community. Divorce, especially for women in conservative families, was seen as a last resort, a source of embarrassment and a stain on family honor. It was often interpreted as a personal failure or rebellion, regardless of the reasons behind it. For Samia, the idea of divorcing her cousin was terrifying, not because she feared being alone, but because she feared becoming the target of gossip, shame, and rejection. Still, the emotional toll of staying was growing unbearable. By 2014, Samia had made up her mind. She realized that no matter the consequences, she could not continue living a life that wasn't hers. She quietly filed for a religious divorce through the Islamic Sharia Council in the UK. The process was not easy. She had to provide evidence of coercion and neglect, and she faced resistance even from within the council. But eventually, the divorce was granted. It was a bold step, one that would change the course of her life. After the divorce, Samia began the process of healing. She left the tightly monitored environment of her family home in Bradford and moved to Dubai, a city where cultures mixed, traditions were more relaxed, and opportunities felt endless. For the first time in years, she could breathe. She could walk alone, explore her interests, and live without constant supervision. It was in Dubai, during this fresh chapter of her life, that she met Syed Mukhtar Kazim. Kazim was a fellow Pakistani expatriate, but unlike those she had known before, he carried no judgment, no demands, and no controlling expectations. He treated her with kindness and respect, listening to her thoughts and encouraging her independence. Their bond grew naturally over time. There was no pressure from either side. They talked, laughed, and supported one another. For Samia, it was a completely new experience, being valued for who she was, not what she represented. Their relationship was built on mutual trust. They came from similar backgrounds but had both chosen different paths. Kazim understood her struggles and admired her courage. He once said that Samia didn't want luxury or grand gestures. She just wanted peace, a safe space to exist, and the freedom to make her own choices. With Kazim, she found that. In 2014, not long after her religious divorce was finalized, Samia and Kazim got married. The wedding was simple but full of meaning. It was registered under both British and Islamic law, making it fully legal. For the first time in her life, Samia had made a choice that was hers alone. She wasn't doing it for her family or out of duty, she was doing it for herself. When Samia informed her family of the new marriage, their response was immediate and severe. To them, her decision was not just a betrayal, it was an offense. They refused to recognize the divorce, asserting that the Islamic Sharia Council had no legal authority in either Pakistan or the UK. In their eyes, Samia was still married to Shakil, and by marrying Kazim, she had committed adultery. This wasn't just a legal dispute, it was a full-blown ideological rupture. Samia had crossed a line her family never believed she had the right to cross. She had rejected a union they had arranged and had embraced a love they had not sanctioned. Samia's relationship with her family quickly deteriorated. Her father reportedly disowned her. She was labeled dishonorable. Relatives stopped speaking to her. Her mother and siblings remained distant. Attempts at reconciliation were either ignored or rejected. And yet, Samia remained hopeful. She still believed, somewhere deep down, that with time, things might heal, that the people who raised her would one day understand her decision. But that day never came. Living in Dubai with Kazim, she appeared content. Her friends say she began smiling more. She had started making plans, both personal and professional. Though estranged from her family, she remained rooted in her values. She kept her faith, her dignity, and her determination to live life on her own terms. But culture, once disrupted, has a long memory. In communities where reputation is currency, a daughter's independence can be seen not as courage, but as betrayal. The walls that had once housed Samia's childhood were no longer a refuge. They were a reminder of the life she had escaped. What she didn't know was that she hadn't outrun it. Samia began receiving threats from her family not long after their marriage. There were angry messages, menacing phone calls, pressure to return to her first husband. And as the relationship between her and her family deteriorated, the fear in her voice grew more and more obvious. In 2014, the situation escalated further. Rather than acknowledge that she had left on her own, her family reported her as a missing person to the local police in Bradford. They claimed she had disappeared, that something might have happened to her. But Samia wasn't missing. She was living openly in another country, legally married, and very much alive. The police opened a formal missing person investigation. As part of their due diligence, they reached out to individuals who might have knowledge of her whereabouts. One of those contacted was the same Shia cleric from the Islamic Sharia Council who had granted Samia her divorce. According to official accounts, that cleric became the target of abuse. He reported that Samia's family members had called him repeatedly and launched into angry tirades, questioning his authority, insulting him, and making threats. He was so concerned by the hostility that he recorded the calls and submitted the recordings to the police in 2014. It was a rare step, but one that spoke volumes about the tone and pressure her family was willing to apply. Not just on Samia, but on anyone who helped her leave. The case was eventually closed when authorities confirmed that Samia was safe and well in Dubai. But for her family, it wasn't just about finding her. It was about control, reasserting it by any means necessary. And the pressure didn't stop there. In 2015, Samia returned to Bradford for a short visit. No one knows exactly why. Some believe it was to sort out personal documents. Others say she still harbored hope for reconciliation. Despite everything, she hadn't severed her ties completely. Some small part of her believed she could still bridge the distance between her family and her new life. A family meeting was arranged, but this time, Samia wasn't going in blind. Given the prior harassment, West Yorkshire Police assigned a chaperone to accompany her. It was an unusual step, but one that highlighted just how toxic the situation had become. For her own safety, she needed official protection to sit across the table from her relatives. That meeting, too, descended into hostility. According to police records and later media reports, the conversation quickly spiraled. Accusations were thrown. Voices were raised. No progress was made. It wasn't a reunion, it was a confrontation. At the end of it, police issued an official warning to one of her relatives, her mother, for verbal harassment. Samia walked out of that room knowing the truth. Her family hadn't softened. They hadn't forgiven. And they certainly hadn't changed. Still, she returned to Dubai and resumed her life with Kazim. She remained outwardly calm, but there was always a lingering unease beneath the surface. She knew her family's stance. She knew how deeply they felt they had been shamed. And in communities where honor can outweigh even the law, that kind of resentment is rarely dormant. It waits, it festers, and sometimes it strikes. By the summer of 2016, Samia hadn't spoken to most of her family in months. The trauma of previous visits, the constant threats, and the lack of acceptance had pushed her into emotional isolation. Then, one day in July, the silence broke. A message came from Pakistan. Her father, Mohammed Shahid, was seriously ill. Her family urged her to come home quickly. There was no time to wait. If she wanted to see him, she had to come now. Kazim was skeptical. After everything that had happened, he wasn't convinced. Could this be a ruse, a manipulation? But Samia was torn. Despite all she had endured, she still felt a duty, a daughter's instinct to be present at the end. "They're still my family," she reportedly said. "I can't just ignore this." And so, against her husband's warnings, she booked a ticket. If you've made it this far into Samia Shahid's story, it means you care about truth and justice. These stories are not easy, but they matter. Help us raise awareness by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this with others. The more people who hear Samia's name, the harder it becomes for the world to look away. On July 14, 2016, she boarded a flight to Islamabad, alone. She told no one else of her plans, no friends, no police, no embassy contacts. Just a simple return to the place where it all began. It was meant to be a final visit, a goodbye, maybe even a chance to heal old wounds. But what Samia didn't know was that for some, there were wounds that never healed. And some debts, they insist, must be paid. When Samia Shahid landed in Pakistan in mid-July 2016, she was cautious but hopeful. She had traveled thousands of miles from Dubai in response to an urgent call. Her father, she was told, was critically ill. Despite everything that had passed between her and her family in the years since she divorced her cousin and remarried a man of her choosing, she believed it was her duty to go. Samia arrived in Islamabad and made her way to the rural village of Pandori in the Jhelum district of Punjab. She did not share much publicly about the trip, but in private, she remained in close touch with her husband, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who had stayed behind in Dubai. In the early days of her stay, Samia maintained regular communication with Kazim. He later described their exchange as a constant stream of messages. They spoke frequently, checked in with each other multiple times a day, and shared updates. Samia gave no indication that anything was wrong. To Kazim, she seemed alert, focused, and eager to return home once her visit ended. But everything changed the day before she was due to leave. The messages stopped. Without warning or explanation, all communication from Samia ceased entirely. No more texts, no more calls. Her phone was no longer reachable. WhatsApp showed no activity. Her digital presence, normally active and responsive, fell completely silent. At first, Kazim tried not to panic. He assumed there might be a network issue. Perhaps her phone battery had died. Maybe she was attending to her family. But as the hours passed and his calls remained unanswered, a slow dread began to set in. He contacted members of her family in Pandori. Their responses were evasive. Some told him she was unwell. Others said she was sleeping or resting. No one allowed him to speak to her directly. No one offered to pass her the phone. He pressed harder. Still, there was no clarity. Then, on July 20th, Kazim received the news that shattered everything. He was told that Samia was dead. How, where, when were the question running through Kazim's mind. The cause, according to her family, was a heart attack. They claimed she had passed away suddenly, without prior symptoms. What's more, she had already been buried, quickly and without delay, in the family graveyard in Pandori. The abruptness was jarring. No one had informed Kazim when she fell ill. No one had contacted him when she died. He had not been consulted about burial arrangements. He had not been invited to the funeral. His wife had disappeared from his life without even a chance to say goodbye. To make matters worse, there was no medical documentation to support the claim of cardiac arrest. No physician had examined her body. No ambulance had been called. No hospital had been involved. Her death had been accepted at face value by her family, and her burial completed before questions could be asked. Kazim's shock gave way to immediate suspicion. Samia had been in good health before traveling. She had shown no signs of illness during their regular conversations. Her sudden death and the speed with which she was buried raised serious red flags. Kazim wasted no time. He reported the matter to authorities, both in Pakistan and at the British High Commission in Islamabad. He formally requested an investigation, arguing that her death was deeply suspicious and possibly criminal in nature. From the start, Kazim refused to accept the vague explanation of a sudden heart attack. He knew Samia had been in good health, and their conversations before her silence gave no indication of illness or distress. Her abrupt disappearance, followed by her rapid burial and lack of any medical documentation, all raised urgent red flags. He demanded a post-mortem examination. Given the absence of medical reports, the conflicting stories told by her relatives, and the already tense history between Samia and her family, he believed something was being hidden. He feared that her death had not only been sudden but deliberate. His suspicion was not unfounded. Samia had previously confided in him about threats from her family and their unrelenting pressure to leave him and return to her ex-husband. These weren't idle concerns. They were warnings that something dangerous could happen. In response to Kazim's appeals and growing pressure from UK officials and international media outlets, Pakistani authorities reluctantly agreed to open a formal investigation. The case gained traction quickly. Human rights activists, journalists, and political representatives began raising questions. Under scrutiny, local police authorized the exhumation of Samia's body just days after her burial. This was a rare and bold step, signaling that the authorities were finally treating the situation with the seriousness it deserved. The exhumation was carried out under tight security and official supervision. Forensic pathologists were brought in to perform a comprehensive post-mortem. The results left no room for doubt. Samia Shahid had not died from a heart attack. She had been strangled. The forensic report documented visible bruising and marks around her neck. The patterns were consistent with manual asphyxiation, indicating that someone had used their hands or an object to compress her airway. Her throat showed signs of internal trauma. There were broken blood vessels in her eyes and petechial hemorrhaging, all classic signs of strangulation. Crucially, there was no indication of heart disease, organ failure, or any other natural cause of death. The conclusion by the medical examiner was chillingly clear. Samia's life had been ended by force. She had been killed. The false death certificate, the refusal to notify her husband of her condition or death, the immediate burial without official authorization. Everything pointed to a carefully planned cover-up. Her family had attempted to portray her death as natural, hoping to bury both her body and the truth. With these findings in hand, Pakistani authorities reclassified the case from a natural death to a homicide. It marked a turning point in the investigation. What had initially been passed off as a tragic loss was now clearly a criminal case. Detectives began retracing the final days of Samia's life, interviewing family members and examining call records, messages, and witness testimonies. As the investigation deepened, public interest surged. Samia's story quickly spread across news outlets in both Pakistan and the UK. Politicians in the UK demanded diplomatic pressure. Human rights organizations called for justice, urging both governments to take honor-based violence seriously. For the first time, Samia Shahid's name became known not as a private citizen but as a symbol of resistance against cultural abuse and gender-based injustice. Kazim's relentless pursuit of the truth had succeeded in cutting through a wall of silence. His insistence on a post-mortem, his appeal to diplomatic channels, and his unwavering belief in Samia's innocence forced authorities to act. It was his voice that ensured hers would not be forgotten. But there was more to the story. According to the full investigative report later released by the Punjab police, Samia had also been sexually assaulted before her death. This detail, initially kept from the public due to its sensitive nature, added an even more horrific layer to the crime. Forensic tests showed physical trauma consistent with non-consensual sexual activity. Investigators later confirmed that the assault had taken place shortly before she was strangled. The revelation shocked the public and investigators alike. It was no longer just a case of honor killing. It was a case of brutal and premeditated abuse. The sexual assault indicated that Samia's final moments were marked not just by fear and violence, but also by humiliation. Whether committed by her ex-husband or another person in the household, the assault added to the growing evidence of a coordinated plan to silence her once and for all. The findings intensified public outrage. The press began demanding accountability, naming the suspects, and questioning how such a crime could have occurred under the guise of family reconciliation. On August 3, 2016, Samia's ex-husband, Chaudhry Mohammad Shakil, was arrested by police in the Jhelum district. He was questioned for hours by detectives from Punjab's elite investigative unit. As pressure mounted, a confession followed. According to police accounts, Shakil admitted to taking Samia's life. His motive, they claimed, stemmed from a blend of personal resentment and a perceived loss of status. After Samia divorced him and married another man, Shakil had been stripped of the possibility of gaining a UK visa and residency through her. That dream had died with their marriage, and in the eyes of many investigators, it had festered into something darker. When Samia returned to Pakistan, the resentment boiled over. Shakil, investigators alleged, attempted to pressure her into renouncing her second marriage and accepting him again as her husband. But Samia refused. The confrontation escalated. She threatened to contact the British authorities if he tried to take her passport or prevent her from returning to Dubai. That's when, according to police, Shakil attacked her. In his confession, he described strangling Samia with a scarf. Investigators further alleged that her father, Mohammed Shahid, had held her legs down to stop her from fighting back. The police report painted a picture of a planned and coordinated act, not a crime of passion, but one committed with purpose. The case grew more disturbing as prosecutors investigated the possibility that Samia had been raped shortly before she died. Though the details were kept tightly controlled, forensic evidence supported the claim of sexual assault. Whether this was committed by Shakil or someone else remains unclear. But the implications were devastating. Following the confession, homicide charges were formally filed against Shakil. Pakistani authorities also named Samia's father, Mohammad Shahid, as a co-conspirator. He was arrested shortly after and accused of assisting in the atrocities and obstructing justice. There was another dimension to the case, one that brought attention to a controversial legal loophole in Pakistan's justice system. Under the country's Diya law, the family of an homicide victim can legally forgive the perpetrator, particularly when the accused and victim are related. This often leads to honor killers walking free. In Samia's case, Shahid, being both the victim's father and the alleged accomplice, could have legally pardoned his nephew Shakil, potentially ending the prosecution altogether. Investigators believed this was precisely the plan. Had the case not received international scrutiny, Shakil might have walked free under the guise of forgiveness. Shahid, the very man who stood accused of holding his daughter down while her life was taken, was also the one legally positioned to forgive her killer. It was a chilling exploitation of a deeply flawed system. But the confession changed the course. The court proceedings began in Pakistan amidst widespread media attention. Public anger in the UK and Pakistan surged. Members of the British Parliament demanded full transparency. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, condemned the homicide and the potential abuse of the Diya law. While Shakil remained jailed, the man accused of helping him, Samia's father, Mohammad Shahid, was granted bail and returned to the UK. He never faced trial. He died in 2018, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a sense of incomplete justice. Chaudhry Mohammad Shakil, her first husband, remained in police custody, having allegedly admitted to strangling Samia with her scarf. The motive, as investigators saw it, was rooted in resentment and rejection. Her refusal to return to him, and her remarriage to another man, was viewed by him as an unforgivable insult. The confession detailed how she resisted, how she threatened to seek help, and how he ended her life in response. Despite the delays, the evidence remained undeniable. A post-mortem that clearly disproved the family's original story, a forensic record indicating sexual assault, a confession from the ex-husband, a trail of threats, coercion, and documented abuse spanning years. For the prosecution, the case was about more than Samia. It was about accountability in a system where honor-based violence had long gone unpunished. In the months that followed, international awareness grew. Samia's case was cited in global forums on honor violence. Journalists revisited other cases swept under the rug. Lawmakers in Pakistan proposed reforms to restrict the application of the Diya law in honor-based killings. But justice remained slow. The final verdict in Samia's case had yet to be delivered. The courts moved at their own pace, burdened by procedural hurdles and political interference. But one truth stood firm. Samia Shahid had been sexually assaulted and her life taken. Her death had been staged. Her killers had nearly gotten away with it. And only the persistence of one man, her husband, and the involvement of two nations had exposed the truth. There was no public remorse from the family. No statement of sorrow, no acceptance of wrongdoing. Instead, they continued to discredit Samia's choices. Her divorce, they claimed, was invalid. Her second marriage, they insisted, was a sham. In their eyes, Samia had brought shame upon the family. That belief lingered, unyielding even after her death was proven to be a homicide. The silence from those closest to her was deafening. Meanwhile, her second husband, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, was left to carry the weight of a life stolen and a justice system that moved too slowly but was about ensuring that the woman he loved did not die in vain. That her voice, though silenced, would not be erased. His grief was constant, but it was accompanied by frustration. He had fought for her truth to be known, and though the cover-up had been exposed, closure remained elusive. The pain of knowing she had died alone, betrayed by those who claimed to love her, haunted him. Internationally, Samia's case sparked a wave of anger and reflection. In the UK, politicians condemned the killing. In Parliament, her name was spoken alongside demands for reform. Better protections for women facing familial abuse, stronger monitoring of overseas travel under duress, and increased cooperation with foreign governments in investigating suspicious deaths. In Pakistan, the backlash was intense. Human rights groups called for the end of honor-based violence. Legal experts pointed to systemic failures that allowed such crimes to go unchecked. And within months of her death, Pakistan's parliament passed a landmark bill targeting honor killings, removing the legal loophole that allowed killers to walk free through familial forgiveness. The bill made honor killing a crime punishable by mandatory life imprisonment, regardless of pardon. Samia's case had not just made headlines, it had forced change. Though Shakil awaited a final verdict and delays plagued the court process, the wheels of accountability had turned. Slowly, imperfectly, but irreversibly. Samia Shahid had lost her life, but her story ignited a reckoning across continents. Her silence had been forced, but what followed became a global outcry. She was not forgotten. Let this case be a call to action. Demand stronger protections for women at risk. Challenge the cultural norms that excuse violence in the name of honor. Support reforms that close legal loopholes, allowing perpetrators to escape justice. Share her story, speak her name, and never stop asking for the justice she, and so many like her, deserve. If you found this story important and believe in the power of truth and awareness, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more real stories like this to light. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and share this video to keep the conversation going.